Now we welcome Eva Åberg, the Director of Vi Agroforestry and Chair of Agroforestry Network, to do the introduction. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you, Matilda, and I'm very happy to be here and welcome everyone. As we all know, in present days, we're facing a number of global challenges, such as increasing world hunger and human-induced climate change, land, soil, and biodiversity degradation. In order to prevent worse things to happen and trying to come to terms with deteriorating trends, it's our obligation to work with nature-based solutions. Representing Agroforestry Network, a Sweden-based network of organizations and research institutes, agroforestry is the focus of our solution. Agroforestry as a method is unique in its possibility to provide multiple benefits, not only for small-scale farmers, but also for society as a whole. My organization, Vi Agroforestry, work with exactly this. Small-scale farmers using agroforestry as a way to provide food, to increase income, and to be resilient to different shocks that may come. And we have discovered that to increase results, we need to use a human rights-based approach. And a lot of emphasis has to be put on gender issues. We will hear more about this, and in this session we will start up with a talk with 4 inspiring panelists representing government, investors, the research community, the business community, and civil society organizations in a session moderated by Sara Gräslund from SLU, the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. This dialogue will be followed by an interactive session with you as an audience, and you will get more instructions on that. That part will focus 3 different subjects: gender, policy development, and biodiversity. After a brief reporting, our panelists from our earlier session will provide some reflections on said subjects. We aim at having this session as a dialogue between the different actors and participants to increase collaboration regarding key issues for scaling up agroforestry related to knowledge development, policy and practice, gender equality, new value chains, and that contributes to biodiversity and resilience to meet challenges such as climate change. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Eva. I think we're all very much looking forward to this session. And before we start with the discussion with our panelists, we will have a keynote speak from Janine Ericson, the State Secretary for Development Cooperation at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And this message is pre-recorded, so I will share my screen. And give me a second.
Our planet is in a stage of emergency. A climate crisis bringing an increased number of tropical storms, floods, wildfires, and droughts. A biodiversity crisis with an accelerating extinction of species and degradation of ecosystems, raising sharp questions about how our livelihood depend on our relationship with nature. It's an inequality crisis exacerbated by the socio-economic effects of the global pandemic, disproportionately affecting those who are already most vulnerable. A gender equality crisis with the global gender gap widening in the wake of the global pandemic. This is the here and now, not the distant future. We see the effects around the world today, and if we fail to address this intellect crisis, we will see more hunger, new pandemics, greater injustice and marginalization, more conflicts, and forced migration. We must get on track to a redefined relationship with the biosphere, urgently transitioning to fossil-free economies, policies to ambitiously building back better, greener, and more fair, ensuring global action in Kunming and Glasgow. This is inevitable. But it is not enough. Change happening on the ground, all over the world, is what will change the tide. Agroforestry can contribute to more defendable livelihoods, restoration of degraded land, climate resilience, and a way out of poverty. When taking into account questions of equal ownership and use of land, it can also contribute to the empowerment of women and girls while increasing yields. Putting the needs of smallholder farmers, households and communities at the center is a solution addressing global challenges related to sustainable food production and consumption, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And it is with this background that the Swedish government is prioritizing integrating biodiversity action in its development cooperation as a crucial pathway to a green and fair future. It is only through concerted action and integrated approaches that the UN Sustainable Development Goals can be reached. Resilient ecosystems must be the basis for land use planning, producing both socioeconomic benefits and preserved biodiversity. Rule books for land use should be coherent, encouraging companies to apply long-term sustainability policies and methods for both people and planet. Many of us oftentimes feel that the global challenges are daunting. Agroforestry is also a way to demonstrate that we actually can do this. As we speak, degraded land is being restored to provide sustainable production. Local communities are finding new solutions to live in harmony with nature. Businesses realize that their future must be fossil-free and nature-positive. Governments step up and commit. And this is the time for more determination and more cooperation. Transformative change is not out of reach. And as we move forward, the bar needs to be raised even higher. We must expect a lot of ourselves and of each other. Building momentum, sharing ideas, learning and innovating. This is what we are here to do today and every day. And then to go out there together and act, because this is our chance. Thank you.
That was inspiring words from the State Secretary for Development Cooperation. Now we will head up into session 2, where we will have a panel conversation moderated by Sara Gräslund, head of SLU Global at the Swedish Agricultural University. So welcome, Sara.
Thank you, Matilda. We have a fantastic panel with us here today, representing different perspectives. We have representatives from research, from business, from civil society, policy development, and development cooperation. And our first panelist is Ingrid Airborne, and Ingrid is a professor in agricultural cropping systems at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And she's also a senior research fellow at World Agroforestry, ICRAF. And previously she was ICRAF's regional coordinator for Southeast Asia at the time when the Southeast Asian countries developed their joint agroforestry guidelines policy. And she has a great interest in connecting research, policy, and practice. And one of the things she's working on currently is leading a large research collaboration called Drylands Transform, achieving the SDGs in East African drylands. So Ingrid, could you please tell us a bit about why you got interested in agroforestry to begin with?
Yes, nice to see you all. It's difficult to know where to start, but looking at it from how it looks like globally, actually tree covers a large proportion of agricultural landscapes. We usually think that the trees are in the forest, and of course they are in most cases, but 43% of agricultural land has at least 10% tree cover. And as much as 23% of the agricultural land has at least 20% tree cover. that means that even if we don't always think about it, we might not always call it agroforestry, and we might not always fully utilize all the potential benefits of these trees. They are very present in our rural landscapes and where farmers are living and working. So that is sort of one perspective, because I see agriculture as part of the landscape and the livelihoods of the people living in the landscape. And in my research, we study how this sort of the multifunctional landscape contributes both to the ecosystem services, the productivity in the landscape, and the livelihoods of the farmers and their families. So since I am an agricultural scientist trained in that, then we always look at both sort of the nature and people together. We don't only like study nature or people, but it is an interaction between the nature and people. That is the character of agriculture. And that's also how I got into being interested in agroforestry, since that is part of the bigger picture. Then, I mean, in Sweden, we think sometimes a little bit too little grazing areas and open landing compared to all the forests. But in my experience from working both in Southeast Asia for quite many years and also in East Africa, it's not at all the case. So their farmers are completely critical and in the farmland for really bringing back trees and their functions in the landscape and to the people. So if I take some examples to make it maybe a little bit more concrete to see what it can mean, starting in Asia and in the projects I'm working with in the uplands of Vietnam, it's sort of in the upper areas, not in the river valleys, but in the upper areas with very sloping land. Their agroforestry was some decades back more seen as something to prevent erosion, something farmers had to do up in the highlands to prevent erosion down into the rivers and silting of the hydropower stations. Of course, that was not motivating for the people uphill. And now the modern version of agroforestry there is more into high value trees. It's trees for fruit production, for example, or nuts, and it's to have more multi-layer cropping systems with trees together with crops. It can be maize, it can be beans, or it can be coffee, and together also with grass strips to prevent erosion and for fodder for animals. So by thinking and evaluating, as we do as research, to see how can we avoid competition between these different plants, how can we sort of utilize the labor in a good way across the season, and how can farmers collaborate with each other, because that's necessary both for the inputs, but also for reaching the market where they can sell their products. So that is sort of a way of we can say sustainable intensification, or more partly commercialized agroforestry, but still small scale from the farmer family's perspective, but many people in the same area cultivating plums or mango or longan or some other fruit that can become quite big quantities from that area. Very different experiences is from my projects in sub-Saharan Africa, where it is both the very small scale mixed crop livestock farmers in a bit more humid areas, and I'm sure Wangu will talk more about that, where they really have livestock and crops together, and it's humid enough to really have fodder shrubs, trees, crops, and sort of livestock together. And then I can maybe come back for your next question, Sara, with the experience from drylands, which is very different because there it isn't growing as well as in the more humid areas. So maybe I start with that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you so much for giving this broad perspective and also a glimpse of what it could look like in different parts of the world. Our second panelist is Wangu Mutua, and she is an economist by training and works for Vi Agroforestry as the Deputy Regional Director for East Africa. And she has 2 decades of experience from working closely with local communities to to improve livelihoods with the help of agroforestry. And she has also significant experience in supporting local communities in organizing themselves into farmers' organizations. And she's increasingly been working together with private actors as partners in driving positive change among local communities. So Wangu, could you please tell us a bit about the work that you do with Vi Agroforestry in East Africa?
Thank you for this opportunity. Vi Agroforestry has been active in East Africa since 1983, and it's been a journey, like Professor Ingrid has mentioned, the need for people being able to use what is around them, the land, the natural resources around them to take care of themselves, take care of their livelihood, becomes even more important. And the information on how to do this sustainably becomes more crucial. And for Vi Agroforestry, agroforestry and using sustainable farming methods has been one of the ways that we have used to support the communities in the region that we are working in, and not only be able to improve their livelihoods, but also them being able to engage their governments and the policymakers to make things better for them and make things work for them. So for Vi Agroforestry, in a nutshell, I would say it's promoting agroforestry to take care of a number of issues. It's like agroforestry at the center and so many things around the trees coming into play. And what Professor Ingrid mentioned also, it's the interplay of how the issue of fodders, for example, and the role that comes in, the opportunity also to take care of the soils and how to ensure that the food, for instance, that is being produced is the yield is increasing, and ensuring that at the end of the day, the farmer is able to make to earn a revenue out of all these efforts that they're putting in. But we'll be able to come into this and talk more about this as we proceed.
Great, thank you. And you have a lot of experience from gender equality integration in your work. And it would be great if you could give us some first words about the work with gender equality in agroforestry, and perhaps start with some of the main challenges that you see there.
Thank you, Sara. Absolutely. We do work in a region that is very much a patriarchal society, and that comes with quite a lot of challenges from our work working with the community, with the farmer organizations, and all this. We see various layers of this popping up, and several challenges that already we have to address or we have to deal with and work with the communities as we move along. And the social norms that make it acceptable that some roles or some issues are not the domain of women or are specifically set aside for men, that becomes one of the major challenges. With agroforestry, you're talking of tree planting as well. So with tree planting, you're looking at very long-term situation. So when it comes to where are these trees being planted, for instance, already there you touch on the question of land tenure. Who is owning the land? Who has the decision or is able to decide that you can plant these trees that will take how many years to grow? And then who is owning these trees and who is benefiting from these trees? And is the person who is planting the trees assured that 15 years to come, when the trees will be ready, the person is still certain that they will still be able to access this place? So the question of tenure and ownership of land between men and women becomes a barrier in itself, because the practice here is that for majority of people, the land is passed on through families, and it is passed on through the sons. So when you talk of now engaging the young or the female youths in agroforestry, then already there it's a question of, okay, if I am putting the efforts here now, say 10 years from now, maybe the land will have been passed on to my brother, and I will be expected to get married and move into another community. So these are some of the issues that we come across. Household decision making is another issue. Who is making what decisions and for the benefit of who? A real case example that I personally worked with many years when I was based in the field some years back is a group of women whose lands were under sugarcane production, large-scale sugarcane production. And it wasn't because they had decided so, but that was the norm. That was a cash crop, or it still is the main cash crop there. So what happens for majority of them, their husbands were working in the cities, in the towns. So them being left behind, the whole land is on sugarcane, and they cannot cook the sugarcane. So already it's a food security question right there. And then because the setup is such that the sugar factories come and harvest the cane, and everything is operationalized in a manner that when the cane is being paid for, it goes straight to the bank accounts. And in whose name is the bank account? So here you have a situation where the family back home, the women and the children, they don't have the space to grow the food, and they don't have access to the revenue that's coming from the sugarcane. So slowly by slowly, these women started putting in, taking small space. They started growing some fruits, some bananas, some vegetables. And within a very short time, they were able to now start actually having bananas that they could take to the market every week. They could be assured of food, having vegetables that they can use within the family. So these kind of situations on who is making what decisions and in whose benefit becomes an important question when it comes to promoting agroforestry also in the field. Access to financial services also becomes a key issue on who is able to access what services to be able then to drive on the investment they might want to do in the land, for instance, and also accessing extension services or accessing the opportunity to develop themselves. If the opportunities are happening in faraway places where probably they might not be able to drop everything to travel quite far distances to be able to access these trainings, then that becomes a bit of a challenge. And for us, it becomes a question when we're working with farm organizations, for example, it becomes an important point of checking how are the trainings, for example, being organized? Is it in a way that ensures that even the women are able to participate, for instance? Then the choice of the value chains, like I mentioned, with the example of the sugarcane, this is the banana in this case, trying to look into how is this of use not only to the family, but also it's contributing to the other benefits, whether it's contributing to biodiversity, contributing to production, and at the same time ensuring that the family is making an income out of this. So there are several layers you would look at when it comes to gender barriers in agroforestry, but maybe I stop there, but we can talk more as we continue.
Yes, thank you. That's really interesting. And we'll definitely get back to you on this. And I'd like to say that we have several nice questions already in the chat. So please, your questions coming and we'll get back to them. But I'd like to introduce all the panelists first. And I would like to turn to Mikhail Tarasov. And Mikhail is IKEA's global forestry manager, and he's leading the company's forestry agenda in line with the company's ambition to become forest positive. And he's working with a large team of forestry specialists, as well as their purchasing teams and different business partners across the world to secure compliance with IKEA's forestry requirements. And he's also managing IKEA's forestry partnership with WWF and other international organizations to promote sustainable forestry. And Mikhail has over 20 years of experience in sustainable forestry and supply chain management across the world, and holds a PhD in forest ecology. So Mikhail, could you please tell us briefly about what you and IKEA works with in relation to integrated farming systems such as agroforestry?
Hi everyone, and thank you, Sara, for introduction and the question. Yeah, indeed, I'm happy to share our experience as a global supply chain company in this field. And I can start by reflecting that we are still on a learning curve to really understand the true potential of agroforestry system. Socio-economical, environmental benefits. We are also on a journey to understand the scale that agroforestry is used in our global supply chain, because in many cases that requires the level of traceability to understand whether products or ingredients or the components of the products come from, to really high granularity of traceability to the farm level, essentially, or forest management unit level in case of forestry. So we are still on a journey considering our supply chain, but I'm happy to give a few examples where we work specifically with our partners and what our business partners or sometimes suppliers are doing. So maybe starting with our partnership with the Forest and Farm Facility of the Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations in north of Vietnam, which is looking into agroforestry cooperatives and assistance to agroforestry cooperatives to empower them, especially those involved in the rural area, remote area, marginalized communities. So one of the ideas to motivate and provide the competence to the farmers to prolong the rotation of acacia. And acacia is typically grown by very fragmented agroforestry farmers. And when farmers understand that they can get a better yield, get a better value of the acacia, this is where things really start to change and the motivation start to grow, to continue better forestry practices. But then it's always an agroforestry where they use different perennial trees with cash crop medicine plants in a lower part of the system, basically. They also introduce a multi-tree species, including like spicy fruit and essential oils and stuff like that. So this is very important project, and it also gets an external verification through Forest Stewardship Council FSC certification system. And I'm happy to announce that we just signed a second phase of our contribution to Forest and Farm Facility. So we're looking forward to working more. My second example would be moving from east-west, India and Pakistan, where we are working with WWF in our long-term partnership by working with the farmers growing cotton and since recently trees in agroforestry system. So in India, the farmers are planting trees for conservation purposes of the wetlands to enhance ecosystem services for biodiversity, soil fertility, and regulation of the water tables. And in Pakistan, we are working with the tree planting organizations. So we are having an ambition to plant 1 million trees over 5 years, and there was already quite some work done. It also has a very interesting and important element of small nurseries, where we encourage them through the partnership the women enterprises that are contributing to provide this seedling planting materials. Then a couple of more examples of what our business partners, our suppliers and the supply chain partners along the value chain are doing. Just to briefly mention that what we are aware of, the cocoa production in Ivory Coast or coffee production in Uganda that's actively using the shade trees. And planting also include the fruit tree species. And you know that the shaded trees can yield substantial returns from the shade tree products, also the fuel woods and fruits like avocado or jackfruits, mango, and so on, which can also compensate farmers if there are low coffee yields and provide a food product for households and another income stream. So that's another thing. And maybe the last one, really going to the West. And this is where, again, our business partners in supply chain and big plantation companies like Suzano, Klabin, and others in Brazil practice agroforestry silviculture production in communities located along their forest plantations. And those programs usually are developed to achieve Forest Stewardship Council certification requirements, but they have a major social impact and of course secure involvement of the local communities. So just to give you some flavor of the ideas, and as I said that we are still on a journey to understand the true scale of the agroforestry system used in our global supply chain.
Great, thank you. I'm wondering if you could help us understand if agroforestry as a production system, if you think that it, from a business perspective, that it could be used to a larger extent by international companies, that you could source from these kinds of systems to a larger extent, and what would need to be in place for that to happen?
Very good and very relevant question. As I can repeat once again, we are still learning about the true importance of the system, its socio-economical implications, and real. And we believe that it has a significant economic element with its sustainable and diversified benefits coming from different crops and components of the systems. I would mention maybe a few important elements, preconditions that must be in place in order to enable successful agroforestry systems. So one of them is a clear legal framework in producing countries, including relevant laws, policies, and regulations that would really enable a clear production and access to a global supply chain that increasingly demand traceability and proof of legality. Then I think what Wangu already mentioned, that land tenure rights and ownership rights, that the user rights, whatever you call it, it's a must that needs to be in place. Of course, this is as important as availability of suitable land. And this leads me also to my next point, and it's a competence of the farmers. Sometimes you meet examples when the farmers are planting certain crops or certain tree species because their fathers or grandfathers did the same. But that may not always reflect the market reality. It may not always be based on true knowledge of the properties of the soil, properties of the landscapes. And this is what we are attempting to do in our partnership by bringing this knowledge, by really empowering and bringing technical assistance and competence to farmers' unions. And maybe I can mention one more last but far not least, and it's really importance of the participatory approach and the landscape approach. You can't really kind of look into the agroforestry system from the management unit only, like traditional forestry consideration would be. It is a landscape approach, especially as we speak about those regions like Southeast Asia or Africa, where you really need to consider the landscape. And I already mentioned that the women empowerment is really key and essential because they're absolutely critical, I would say, factor in the whole system that will simply collapse. So when you strengthen them, we clearly see that the system is getting stronger and we are gaining much better results.
Great, thank you so much. Really interesting. We'll get back to you. And our fourth panelist here today is Maria van Berlekom. And Maria works at Sweden's International Development Cooperation Agency, Sida. and she's currently the head of Sida's unit for global cooperation on environment. And Maria has a background as a biologist, and she has significant experience from development cooperation with a particular focus on integrating biodiversity and wider environmental issues to benefit poverty reduction. And she's previously been the director of the Swedish International Biodiversity Program, SweetBio, and she's been part of the Swedish delegation to the Convention on Biological Diversity. But she also has a very broad development cooperation profile across sectors, not the least from her 5 years as head of Sweden's development cooperation with Tanzania a couple of years back. Maria, could you please tell us about when you first got in touch with agroforestry?
Thank you, Sara, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this fantastic conversation and with so many, I think, in-depth experiences. I will now start something a bit like a fossil, since I think my first contact was in the early 80s when I took a course on tropical land use at the Stockholm University way back, and then it was one of the sort of land use systems that was presented. My first more hands-on was doing what's called a minor field study, and I did that actually on soil conservation on the slopes of Mount Kenya in Embu district. And of course, these very elaborate home garden systems was very much a part of that land use, and we did lots of documentation on that. I've also then worked with land use, including agroforestry in many ways. I was 3 years in Tanzania in the late 80s, for example, on a small project on women-focused afforestation, but I actually did lots of those land use and soil conservation and agroforestry. And my husband actually worked at that time for ICRAF on an education network on agroforestry. So lots of different contacts. I think an observation from that time was at the science part. What ICRAF was very much then talking about was the sort of very, I would say, fixed system of Lucina and maize in rows, or Hispania and sorghum in rows, and doing that. I think it broadened very much from that time. But I think one learning from that side was that agroforestry system is not one system. It's different depending on the land use context, whether it's dry land, whether it's more fertile, whether it's upland areas, and so on. And particularly the sort of very fixed system with Lucina and Hispania, I mean, they ended up as invasive species, which was really not very good. So I think one have really to deep, as several of the comments also, which kind of trees, what are the contexts, what are the tenure systems are very, very important to look at.
Great, thank you with this historic perspective. And could you say something about today and Sida's current work in relation to different types of integrated farming systems?
Yes, I can do that. I think at the top of my mind, I can only get one example where agroforestry is in the title, and that is the support to Vi Agroforestry. But I think it's actually a lot of our collaborations which includes this more holistic, more grounded approach. And I wanted to mention a few. I think our broad support to the global network of agriculture research, the CIGAR system. Of course, ICRAF is still a part of that, but will drop out. But I mean, there are many good examples. I would particularly actually like to mention the example of the program called Water, Land and Ecosystems, where agroforestry is, of course, a very integrated part. I think also generally our support to FAO, and again, I mean, both Ingrid and Mikhail mentioned the Farm Forest Facility, which is supported by Sida, a very interesting program. And it's interesting that we have two references here to Vietnam. I actually visited Vietnam 2 years ago, the time we could still travel. And including then visiting the Farm Forest Facility activities in one of the provinces in Dien Bai to the north. And was very impressed what they were doing. I mean, they had this very elaborate integrated system. We visited one farmer, and actually it was very clear that it was the fruits, it was the nuts, it was the fish, And it was the honey that were the main income sources from that system. We also visited sawmills, small sawmills that had benefited from this approach, to enhance the quality and quantity of the acacia, and for sawmills also where women entrepreneurs had a very strong say. So again, I mean, very, very impressive, very, very interesting what happened there. We also have several regional examples, like a support in Southeast Asia to an organization called Recraft the Sea. We also have several examples at country level in Mozambique, in Burkina Faso, Mali, Ethiopia, and so on, but also in Latin America, where agroforestry plays part of a broader approach to improved land use. I think also, because what I put very much as is sort of in exclamation remarks from my side was the issue of tenure, and we've already heard about that. I think Wangu gave a very good expose about the importance of that. And I can also say that we also actually have these tenure issues. We both support facilities working specifically with tenure, like tenure facility, rights and resources initiatives, and so on. But again, I mean, it's clearly an issue that has to be very, very high up on the agenda of any undertaking working with land use, to really make sure that the understanding of who controls both the land, who controls the resources, who can take the decision, who cannot, who benefits and who doesn't, and really have that at the front. So I just want to sort of, re-emphasize or concur with those statements very, very strongly from my side.
Thank you, Maria. Really interesting, and it's a broad picture you paint of the possibilities to support these kinds of systems. And I would like to get back to Ingrid, and if I can first give you a question from the audience, which is from Bill Grayson, who's asking how you define tree cover with respect to the statistic for agricultural land. And if we could also, if you could answer that, and then if we could move on to, and I could ask you a question about the policy development in ASEAN that several has touched upon already, the need for policies to be in place. But if you want to comment first on this tree cover question, please.
Okay, yes. No, these figures come from a global study where they used remote sensing. So it's coming from sort of the remote sensing from the air, and from that way see it sort of the canopy cover of land classified as agricultural land.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So you can look at Sommer et al. 2016, I think.
Perfect, great. And as we heard before, you were working with the ICRAF in Southeast Asia when the Southeast Asian countries developed their joint guidelines for agroforestry. And could you tell us a bit about what they contain and how they are implemented today, these guidelines?
Yeah, no, I will. That's right. So I worked for ICRAF from 2012 to 2018, 6.5 years. I was in Kenya first, and then I was based in Indonesia for 3 years. And yeah, I would really like to emphasize, and I didn't do it because I just take it so natural that research in agroforestry has developed tremendously from what you said, Maria. And I'm very sad that many people still have that conception, because we work with the landscapes and with the livelihoods and sort of diversified species, and yeah, with many different aspects, and of course bring in many different social and economic aspects as well. So when it comes to ASEAN, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, like the EU of Southeast Asia, in their vision and strategy for 2025, they of course realized the great threat of climate change. I mean, many parts of the world is strongly hit, but if you look at maps, sort of hot maps, Southeast Asia with a lot of island nations, with a lot of lowlands, are extremely vulnerable. And it was in that context, sort of really to create resilience to shocks and risks, that they were writing that everywhere where sort of economic and ecological possible, agroforestry was recommended. So that was very, very strong writing from the Asean in their sort of more high-level strategy for the time ahead. So based on that, which was sort of decisions on the minister level, then we which in that time was ICRAF and CIFOR and RIC of the Sea and a number of other regional organizations, we were technical partners, technical support to ASEAN and to their ministers of agriculture and forestry, and were like in a working group and supported with technical material. So we were sort of supporting in developing the guidelines for agroforestry development in ASEAN, which really sort of lay out the different steps and what is needed to implement agroforestry in the region. It's not sort of compulsory. There are countries that don't want to do that, like Malaysia and others have a lot of plantation forestry. They see it as a threat. So they always make sure it's not anything everybody has to do. But actually most of the other countries are very keen because they see agroforestry as to solve the conflict between agriculture and forestry, because it's a landscape with a high population pressure. It's the governments owning this, like state forests. It can be, of course, that the states can sort of give permission to companies to run them for a long time, but there's a lot of like conflicts on the forest margins. And agroforestry is sort of a way to combine crops and trees to benefit sort of both sides, both for conservation and production on the forest side, but also for people living in those margins. Another reason why this was important is that sort of there are ministers of agriculture and ministers of forestry. Very many times it's very little connection in between. And here we had to bridge across, and actually the guidelines were by the end sort of endorsed in the meeting of the ministers of agriculture and forestry. I mean, some countries would have the same ministry, but some countries would not. So that's maybe what I could say. I mean, you can of course read about it in different ways, but I think that the key thing was that it really was sort of climate change conflicts on land use and land rights and resources. They were sort of the driver, even on the sort of government levels, why this should happen. And they don't always call it agroforestry, they would call it social forestry, community forestry, payment for forest ecosystem services. Yeah, it's various ways in different countries.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. I would like, before we go to the next session with the breakout rooms, where we'll have a lot of opportunities to talk more, I would like to get back to Wangu briefly and hear if you could tell us a little bit briefly about how you work in Vi Agroforestry with the supporting the gender equality integration when you have these challenges that you've described.
Thank you, Sara. And I think someone on the chat has asked a similar question. First, I think it's to appreciate the context we are in. It helps that we try to dig into the root cause of why is a situation like this and why is a society like this. It helps that a lot of us in the region also are from within these communities, but also that we work also with our colleagues from outside so that we can together analyze and see what is what and have this exchange of ideas and exchange of cultures and see how this plays about. But most importantly is we have invested a lot in training our staff, the partners we are working with on the ground, the farmer organizations and the members there. They have on human rights-based approaches to development, so that we are on the same page in terms of appreciating that a human being is a human being. It doesn't matter that you are from this culture or the next culture. We first have a common lens through which we look at issues, And then from there, and then we can together assess what is not working out, what should we do, or what should we change, what should we do differently. And then with that understanding, we kind of build a critical mass of people that have share the same values, are of the same opinion, so to say, in terms of having a stand on these issues, and then kind of mobilize a force that together then we can work with to create change. And it is not an easy thing, because you're talking of a whole structural or setup of the society. So it takes time, but with planting the seeds along the way, then it helps to contribute or to start these changes. Women economic empowerment becomes one other critical tool, because with that, they are able to push the boundaries. It's not easy for people to question or to ask, why is this happening this way? Why can it not be done another way? That would not be possible if the economic empowerment is not there. So this becomes another critical tool that is very important in the communities where one group of people is not shunned or is not punished for not conforming, but they can afford to take a stand and make things move. And people can see, the rest of the community can see that, yes, this is working, maybe it should be something we can try. And also it inspires those behind them, because the small girls, they see what is happening, and then they also can dare to think of a different way of things happening in a different way. And of course, reaching out also, I mean, it's not that we isolate and only work with women, we work with the men as well. And they can also see in many instances, I remember a situation where in a certain community, the homes where unfortunately the husband had passed on, the widows were doing so well, and we were questioning why, and they're saying it's because now I can do the things I want to do on the farm without having to wait for someone who is in Nairobi or who is in the capital city to come, and by the time they're coming, the rain season is gone. So having these conversations and seeing if we work together, this is the much we can do for the benefit of everyone in the community. And there's a tool that we use for this household roadmap that brings the whole household, so to say, to look at where is it that we want to be, and how can we utilize all of us, how can we utilize what we have and the resources that we have, and together we work towards that. And what that happens is it opens or it creates a platform for joint decision making, which otherwise in most instances would not be there, because the norm, the default is that one person is making the decisions, and at times the decisions might not be for the benefit of everyone. So yeah. I would say it's not a one magic bullet, but it's a lot of engagement, it's a lot of discussions, it's a lot of buying in, but as long as we are snowballing and creating this critical mass of everyone having the same understanding, then we keep pushing.
Thank you so much. Really interesting to hear about this, Wangu. And time flies, and we have to move on to the breakout session. So I'll hand over to you, Matilda, and we'll keep interacting in the chat. Yeah, are you with us, Matilda?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you all the panelists for a really interesting session. We're truly happy to have you here. We're entering the session number 3, where we will divide into 3 breakout rooms for 15 minutes. Each of the breakout rooms will have its own topic. And you will be able to choose the room yourself. So you choose the topic that lies closest to your heart, or where you want to learn more information, of course. The topic of the rooms are biodiversity, policy, and gender, all in relation to agroforestry. We will ask one person from the organization team will be available in each group for questions. And in the biodiversity room, there will be a short presentation by Maria Schultz from Sida. To keep the discussion questions that we have prepared at hand, we will use a web platform called Padlet, where the discussion topic will be presented and where it will also be possible to take notes under each topic. And I will share my screen right now to show you what it looks like. Let's see. I hope you can see my screen right now. So you have the topic for the webinar at the top. And here we have 3 different groups. We have the biodiversity groups with the corresponding questions below. We have the gender group, and same here, the corresponding questions below, and the policy group. And to the far right, we have the program of today, which might be a little bit late now to read, but it's there if you want to see it. And under each question, you can add comments or notes. And we will ask one in each group, in each room, to take notes and to be the rapporteur to report back to us after these 15 minutes are over. And the link to the Padlet paste is posted in the chat now, I think, Åsa. And we will also let you know when it's time to come back to the main meeting. And we also encourage the panelists to join a group, to join a room, because I'm sure your experience will be highly valued. So let's see if we have the rooms, not the grooms, the rooms. Sorry, the rooms ready. Åsa, what does it look?
I'm opening the rooms now.
Excellent.
So you can click on your screen to choose a room, and I am also posting to everyone in the meeting the link to the Padlet that Matilda just showed on screen.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good discussion. It was, as I said, it felt very, very quick. I hope you still got something out of it and that you managed to get a rapporteur who can report back to the main group. So I think we will start by asking the rapporteur from the biodiversity group to report back. Please go ahead.
Yes, and actually due to time, I will report back since we had quite a few questions in my group. So in the Padlet, actually I say that we have a few issues that has been typed out. And do you have any good examples of how biodiversity are linked to and has been integrated in agroforestry systems? We had a contribution related to pastoral landscapes and how agroforestry systems actually can contribute to biodiversity in relation to pastoral landscape that also has been sort of degraded by more monoculture development. And then also it was comments here on through reintroduction of indigenous species and protection of threatened and endangered species via policy framework. It was also a discussion on that you can have in the landscape more biodiverse areas, and if you have a landscape planning with agroforestry systems that can contribute also to wild biodiversity. On knowledge gaps, there is a need for relatively simple tools to measure biodiversity impacts in forestry and agroforestry, for example, that was imposed here in the Padlet. And then on the Convention on Biodiversity, that agroforestry can be a cost-effective means to achieve food security. And also, of course, contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation in the same time. But also related to the Aichi biodiversity target, the one Aichi biodiversity target 7 on agriculture, and that agroforestry could have been, well, is a cost-effective way to reach the previous strategic plan that included the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets. The new global biodiversity framework is still under negotiation, so it's not in place yet. This was just a few issues from this group, and I think also participants might help out to put some more content in the Padlet, that would be great for us actually to have later on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Maria. And I think that's a really good point. So if anybody wants to fill in some answers to the questions or some reflections, please do that in the Padlet. Because I don't think we in our group, we didn't have time to go through all the questions because there was so much great discussion. So if you have anything you want to share, please add it to the Padlet, and we will bring it together in the note-taking from this session. So the rapporteur from the gender group, would you please report back to the big group?
Hi, it's me. I'm Holly from Banana Link. We kind of took a general approach rather than question by question, but I can just give a kind of update or an overview of some of the things we were discussing. We did talk about examples of how gender has been integrated in agroforestry systems. From Banana Link's perspective, it's an area that there needs to be more research, and we work with large banana plantations and small producers, and in both there's a lack of kind of studies on what's actually happening right now in those systems, but the lack of kind of the moving away from agrochemical inputs and the reorganization of production systems, we see it as something that would really open the door for women to be included in a more meaningful way in the banana industry, because at the moment there's only internationally about 20% women in the workforce. It's very male dominated, so gender is a really important issue for us, and agroforestry and agroecology is a critical moment to try and move towards more gender equity in the international banana supply chain. So then we also discussed smallholders in particular, where the emphasis is more on ensuring food security and income for the household, and the fact that we can't remove the question of who is benefiting in the long term from the work that's put in to improvements. When decisions are being made, it's important that there's clarity and that no one's being shortchanged in the long term by investing a lot of work in. And, in the end, it benefits the other gender, essentially. In terms of knowledge gaps, as I mentioned, in the banana industry, there is a huge lack of kind of studies and available evidence on kind of what's happening right now that would be able to inform work with project design on large plantations or with small producers. But we also discussed from the start that women have the issue from the start. Women have generally less education than men, and if there's extension services, again, it's more difficult for women to reach because they have the double workload, and so it's obviously a barrier for them to have the spare time to be able to access these extension services. And then at the very end, we had a discussion about the comparison between semi-arid areas of Africa and the Sahel region, and in the former there was not so much of an agroecological practice, but it was mentioned that this benefited the whole household through providing trees that were accessible for firewood and fruit and medicine, which kind of led to a kind of leveling up or more equity in the household, because it benefited women. Whereas, where agroecology wasn't practiced, that this benefit wasn't experienced. I hope I've summarized that well. Sorry, that was very scrappy notes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We will move on to the policy group. Will we have some reporting back from the policy group, please?
Hi, my name is Jenny Wikström and I work at Vi Agroforestry, and I will keep myself short since we are in a bit of a time issue here. We had good discussions around the big question is, who should develop the policy around agroforestry? Should it be the agricultural ministry, the forest ministry? And often it ends in somewhere in between. And also that is a very good thing that the civil society is pushing for these issues. But it's also important to remember when a country do have a policy, what's happening next. We need to first develop what hinders agroforestry, and also remember why we are doing a policy from the beginning. And it's important to develop a roadmap, and we need to have things that farmer can benefit from this year and from next year, not only to have a long focus. That was very, very short notes from us. I'm not sure if anyone else in the group wants to add anything. We did discuss a few other things as well, but I think that's the main point.
Thank you, Jenny. They will not be allowed to. I will not let them because we are really short on time and we only have a few minutes left. But so we wanted to invite the panelists to have, if they have any reflections on the group discussions that have been going on. But I have to urge you to be very short since we're short on time. So Ingrid, do you have any reflections?
Yeah, I think the key thing is that we always need to think about many aspects at the same time. We today talked about sort of gender, climate, biodiversity, farmer livelihoods, landscapes, and we need to keep that broad perspective, because if you only focus on one thing, we will lose out on others. So I think that's one reflection.
That's a super short and super good reflection. Thank you, Ingrid. Can we have some reflections from Wangu, maybe?
Yes, thank you, Matilda. I follow the same line with Ingrid. It's an urgent football that has very many corners, so we have to see how to take care of each face, each angle at the same time. And I'm curious how we can keep this discussion. I think it's a lot of interesting conversations that are going on. I was curious to know what's happening in the other groups. Of course, I couldn't split myself into 3. So if there's a way that this conversation can continue, that would be awesome.
Thank you very much. Maria, do you have any reflections?
Maybe to build on what has been said already, yes, the importance of keeping several agendas in the head at one time. And I think linked to that, the importance of actually, not taking a sort of blueprint solution and broadcasting or sort of disseminating it everywhere, but really take into the local context, I mean, the national policies, the local land use conditions, and also the sort of local customs and prerequisites, and again, not to forget the tenure issues.
Very good, very brief, thank you. Mikhail?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe very quickly, 3 learning. I think one of them is really to translate the great learning from science to business. We always like in business to have simple and accurate tools to measure biodiversity impact, to translate the requirements across the supply chain. And vice versa, I can only encourage the project that we mentioned that we are working with Forest and Farm Facility. There is already a great learning. And one more thing that I would like to raise is really, I believe that agroforestry is one of the key elements to really stop ongoing deforestation. Regenerative agriculture and good example how agroforestry system can benefit social and economical environment of the farmers can really be a great motivation to stop deforestation and thus protect biodiversity.
Thank you, Mikhail. I'm super impressed, panelists. Very short and concise reflections. I'm very impressed. So now for the last few minutes, I hope you are okay with a few more minutes. We are ready for session 4, which is going to be really short. Maria Schultz, Senior Policy Specialist and Coordinator, Biodiversity and Ecosystems from Sida. You will have the floor, Maria.
Thanks a lot, Matilda. Due to time, I think the panelists actually summarized very well this short seminar. And I just want to say that on Agroforestry Network's website, you can find more information. And for this meeting, I'm sure we will have notes and also the Padlet, so we can follow up with that later. And concerning Sida's involvement, as you already heard from Maria, we have a lot of contributions. We put a lot of emphasis on agroforestry related to gender, tenure, market, livelihood, smallholder farmers, livelihood opportunities, and so on. So by that, actually, I think we should close, so we don't run over time. I just want to say thanks to all the participants, and thanks for a very interesting discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Maria. So by that, we would like to conclude this webinar, and thank you all for participating, and especially thankful we are for the panelists, of course, Eva Åberg and the State Secretary, for making this event very successful. And I think we can conclude that this discussion is not over. I'm very happy to see a great interest for this webinar, and I think we will have more in the future. So thank you very much, everybody, and bye.